Thank you to all my poetry friends. Saz Agarwal is here, Mr. Bajaj, Saad, Sneha, so many of them are here. This is going to be a lovely evening, especially because we have such beautiful poets and we have poetry. I would like to introduce each of my guests today with some of their own lines. Oh, my little mermaid, shall I tell you a secret? Night is when your mother drowns herself in brandy. To granny I return and lullabies, dripping of partition wounds. A childhood spent collecting pebbles in river's womb. Please give a big round of applause for Anju Makhija. It wasn't me who was dethroned. It wasn't you who was worshipped, but the joys of the gentle strokes on my curves with those fired lips ruminated me like a sacred symbol. I wished the good Lord give me strength to arrest this moment. A big round of applause for Kasturika Mishra. She writes in Odia, English, Hindi, and Urdu. And I've heard she's written a ghazal in Odia. And next we have Kiran Bhat. He's been to 160 countries walking. To become something between the foreigner and the local, to become an existence without name, to act like the honey fly traveling from one edge to the other, observing, listening, writing, but never becoming fully one thing or another, becoming fully myself. This is Kiran Bhat. A big round of applause for all the three panelists. I would like to start this session with this Van Gogh quote. I dream my painting and I paint my dream. Welcome to all the audience and the panelists on the dais. Our topic today is very intriguing and interesting. Poetry voicing experiences or illusions. To simplify it further, I could say poetry, how much of it is a reality and how much of it is a fantasy. Anju, I'll start with you and I will pose the most potent question. How does poetry happen to you? We all go through experiences. We go through mundane experiences and emotions. We go through extremely intense experiences. But all of us do not write poetry. How does poetry happen to you? And what is the process, if there is a process?
Well, I think poets have been trying to answer and avoid this question for a long time, if I may be. For the simple reason that there is no one answer for anybody. It's, for me, as you've asked me, it sort of comes to me, it happens. It's not something I sit down and say, I'm going to write poetry. It might come to you when you're walking, it might come to you the train, in a taxi, when you're moving, anywhere. And often it comes in just little lines. And you're not sure what it means often. So you have to develop that further very often or discard it. Not that everything you write is going to be used. So it just happens to come. And I think that's where, there's a lot of fallacy and a lot of misunderstanding. Because they think poetry comes to you, there is no work involved in it. I think the greatest work a poet has to do is to reject his own work. Because many poets that who I've dealt with and had workshops with will think that everybody, how do you qualify poetry? First, there's no qualification for any writing. Okay, it has to withstand the stand of time, which is obviously the biggest test.
Yes.
But also, the reviews we get. I have a book that's just come out. I will be waiting to read the reviews. About 3 are out this month. I compare them. So I get to know also where I stand. Because we think when we write, it's obviously good and all that. But I know from having spoken to a lot of aspiring poets here, and these days there's a lot of self-publishing, so then you don't even have that
Filter.
filter, I wouldn't say, but you don't even have that self-discipline to say, is my work really worth it? And then they use contacts to get their way through. That's why the process of reviewing is very important, to know from your own peers and things like that.
Kasturika, what about you? What is poetry to you? And has it changed over the years? And how?
Very good evening, everyone. Thank you, Sonali, for having me here. Sri, poetry is for me is like taking my daily dose of live bites, and since I am from the musical background, I have developed this habit of reading a lot, being a librarian in my profession. So I had a long association with books, and that's how I developed a sense of poetry in me. I used to write a lot of poetry, but my reading of poetry has actually improved my poetry of late. And if I have to illustrate something, I was reading this 14th century Sufi poet Maghdum Safi, and I had to compose it for someone, and it went like सावन की रुत आई चलो सखी झूलन झूलिए रे सावन की रुत आए रे हमरे सैया घर पड़ा गए डोला हिल मिल धूम मचावा न चलिए सावन की रुत आई. While reading Maghdum Safi, I understood that that was a meter in the poetry since ages. And these days, we are writing free verses. Almost every one of us is experimenting on free verses. But if we have to enlarge the vision of the past centuries, we'll have to somehow hold on to our tradition and then dwell on the modernity in it and use our skills, our basic skills. So I wrote these lines. गिर आई बदरिया सावन के मन भावन के गिर आई बदरिया सावन के नैनों के बदर भीगे भीगी मोरी अंगियाँ पीली पीली चुनरी रंगी चढ़ाई हरी चूड़ियाँ घिर आई बदरिया सावन के भाग जगे मुझ सुहागन के घिर आई बदरिया. So this is how poetry is an extension of our own self and our own readings, our own experiences. Thank you.
Lovely. Kiran, I would like to ask you something. You've been to so many places, you speak so many languages. Where do you find your foothold? What keeps you rooted or makes you feel at home?
First of all, is my mic not on? Hello? Yeah, this is perfect. Kasturika ma'am, you're such a good singer. I almost feel awkward now because I sing horribly, so I will not sing for anyone. I I don't believe that home is a place. I do not believe, so much writing in the last 20, 30 years is about migration home. I find a little blasé, to be honest, probably because I travel so much. Not that there's anything wrong with writing about home, but for me, home is a moment, home is an experience, home is a millisecond, home is a kashana. It's just, say if I don't live in Pune, I don't do anything here, but I'm having a nice, warm moment with human beings. That's a moment of home for me, even though it's just right now. So I don't believe home has to be anything else but an emotion, experience, a moment.
Lovely. Something I've noticed in all of their works is their experimentation. And especially in Anju, I find your work experimental and refreshing because of its form and the way it deals with humans and reality. You have etched out various characters which are displayed in your poems. Anju also writes plays. So I had read one of her poems, Matra Mandir, in which she writes, "The downpour keeps us in, searching for our God. He is not ours. Fishermen break coconuts, celebrating their God. He is theirs." Or as in the sections of minor voices from her book, Changing Unchanging, where there are stories to be told by a lot of people we see in our everyday life. I'd like Anju to recite something for us from Minor Voices and tell us the story, if there is a story with it.
Well, what she's referring,
Yes, we're here.
what she's referring to specifically, if any of you all have the book, I can give you the page number. You have it, anybody? I'll give you the page number. Okay. You all have it.
Afterwards, and we'll all be signing.
Anyway. So there's a section, well, as in any poetry book is often divided into many sections. There's a section here called Minor Voices. In Minor Voices, I've taken out on the voice of underprivileged children. Children who are usually not given a voice, who are ignored. The kids we see when we pass by on the streets of Mumbai. This particular section is set in Mumbai, where I live. And so you want me to read a poem from there? Yes. Which one would you like?
The train vendor.
Okay. There's one called The Train Vendor. Now, have any of you all been in Mumbai trains? All of you all? अच्छा. तो आपने तो सुना ही होगा, all the kids are there selling stuff. Any of you all have seen the kids selling stuff?
Yes.
Okay, good. Now, not so good. No, not so good actually. And the part of highlighting this, giving them voices, that we take all this for granted, that they are just selling things and we are just buying and going away. But nor do I want to philosophize or anything. I just want to present it as it is. So in a sense, they are. It may open our eyes a little more when we hear it here. In fact, I have a play that's happening next month on the 17th called The Last Train. But that is another story. But obviously, I do travel often by train. And many of these poems, as you said, where do they come? They happen on the train. Okay. You can close your eyes, imagine if you like. 1 rupee, 1 pin, 2 rupee, 2 pin, 3 rupee, 3 pin. Little hands place an oversized tray on my lap. 1 rupee, 1 pin, 2 rupee, 2 pin, 3 rupee, 3 pin. She smiles at me. She smiles at me, black teeth jagged, like stones beneath the tracks. 1 rupee, 1 pin, 2 rupee, 2 pin, madam. 5 rupees, 5 pin. 5 rupees for glucose biscuit. 5 rupees for police hafta. 5 rupees for a Shah Rukh Khan film. Angrezi madam, 1 pin, 5 rupees, 6 pin. Well, I'm thinking about it. Angrezi madam, 1 pin, 5 rupees, 6 pin. Conveyor belt efficiency. She moves the oversized tray to the next lap. एक रुपया एक पिन, 2 रुपया 2 पिन, 3 रुपया 3 पिन. It's a bit of an experiment, so
You can get the book outside. The books are going to be on sale, and you will get a signed copy from all three of the panelists. Kiran, I also find characters in your poetry, but they come as question marks. There are some questions that these characters ask Kiran, and Kiran answers these questions in a poetry written in Mandarin. Can you recite one of the poems from this collection? And can you tell us where are these answers coming from, if it's not Google?
Obviously not. Oh, good. This is working. I can make out. So let me also just explain this book a little bit before, so people understand the context. So Speaking in Tongues is an attempt for me to practice 3 languages that are objectively not my mother tongues. They are Spanish, Mandarin, and Turkish. I lived in each of these countries, Spain, Turkey, and China, for 1 year. And in that time, I made an effort to learn the languages and use them to a certain extent. And from that period, I was also trying to practice the languages, learn them, and also write poetry through both the learning of them and also the exposure to them. So this was both a practice for me, but also a way for me to create a little bit of a different style of poetry, one that is in a language that isn't my own. Maybe I try to write first in that language, then I go to English, which is my first language, then I go back to the foreign language, and then I have a native help me and figure out what I really want to say, and then I finally have a version of the poem that is in Mandarin or Turkish and Spanish that is pretty good, and then it is in English as well, because it was written multilingually, we can say. So the Chinese versions came to me when I was in Tianjin. I used to live in Shanghai. Tianjin is a city I was just visiting when I was living in Shanghai. And I come from a Kannada background. My mother, father are Kannadigas, and we very nice Mangalore Brahmin people, meaning also very traditional. And every time I'd go back to Mangalore, I would constantly be berated by the relatives, like, what are you doing with your life? You're traveling, you're doing this and that. When are you getting married? I'm also an LGBT person. Some knew, some don't. But regardless, like, when are you actually getting on the right path? And at that time, now it's fine because I'm known as a poet and a writer, so no one gives me any hassle. But in my 20s, it was really difficult for me as well, because I always felt like, why can't I just be who I am? And why does it matter so much that I don't do what all the other cousins or this are doing? I have something else. I have something different, maybe. Why can't that be appreciated? So I was in Tianjin, and I was teaching English and also choosing to learn Mandarin. And I had my grandmother, my sweet Ajji. She just passed last year. She was one of the cornerstones of my life. And she was always telling, why do you travel so much? These places aren't your home. Come home. And the poem came to me in Mandarin because I was actively, obsessively studying Mandarin at the time, so I thought in Mandarin. But I'll read it in English because there's not enough time to do all the translingual aspect of this book. That'll add another 20 minutes easily. My grandma says, why do you travel so much? These places aren't your home. Come home. Kiran says, a bee too is born in a place. Its mother and father tell it to stay back. The bee knows that the world has so many flowers that need to be pollinated. If it stays back, the good work will never be done. Kiran says, to accept one's fate is hard. Follow where the wind takes you, hoping it leads you to the bloom. So I wrote these types of poems where I had these answers to these different voices in my head. And some were like my relatives, some were students, some were random people. And
Some are philosophers.
Philosophers as well, yeah. I spoke to Plato, I spoke to Kabir, I spoke to so many different people. And I basically created a collection of 20 poems where I answered these philosophical questions using this kind of Bhakti-esque style of answering. I'll just read one more and then I'll leave it for Kasturika, ma'am.
No, we want to know, where do your answers come from?
Oh, where do they come
You
from?
are avoiding the question.
Let me read one more and then I'll answer. Okay. The president asks, how is freedom in our country? This one is very valuable in 2024, actually. Kiran says, when the lobster is thrust into boiling water, he doesn't know his circumstance. He simply has his legs and claws tied up. Perhaps he knows his destiny. Most likely he does not. The lobster is thrown into boiling water. The lid is put on top. He looks on the other side of the lid, which is translucent. He imagines the island, the fat fish of his thrill, and then he stops thinking. Kiran concludes, Whether or not I have freedom, I'm not sure. My brain has long been boiled. Thank you. Now, where do they come from? I don't know. They just come. I just let it come from me, and it comes. Like all of us. Like all of us, yeah. Yes, yeah.
Kasturika, one very important question. We have a lot of poetry groups in Pune, and they claim that जब तक दर्द नहीं होता तब तक पोएट्री नहीं होती. तो कितना सच है? How much is it necessary to have suffering to write poetry, or is poetry an escape from the suffering, or what is it? What is the relationship?
See, pain is very much a part of any kind of poetry in any language, and all of us are seemingly looking happy, but most of us have our hidden truth, our hidden pain, and our fantasies, where we find outlets for as relief. And as poets, I can make out that in the audience there are 10 people who are relating to me from heart now, because I have already recited few lines. So I don't know whether it is a passing away of pain that I'm attempting to by reciting and touching their hearts, or I am planning to take away their pain in any way. So it's our job. See, if you think in a wholesome way, the poets are like the mirror for anyone in the audience or anyone out in the world. We can sense what the other person is feeling, and there are painful things to be told also. But right now, I don't want to leave anyone with any pain, because the day has already passed. I will read a December poem which is coming to my mind, and it's a bit naughty one. I want the young crowd to enjoy it. दिसंबर की अंदाज़े बयां करूं तो मैं कुछ ऐसा कहना चाह रही हूँ कि बड़े अच्छे लगते हैं, बड़े अच्छे लगते हैं ये तुम्हारा मेरे करीब बैठना, चोरी से मेरा हाथ पकड़ना, बालों को सलीके से पीछे फेंकना, कुछ बोलने का इंतज़ार करना, बड़े अच्छे लगते हैं मेरे कुछ नहीं बोलने पर कुछ बोलने की इल्तिजा करना, आसपास के लोगों से नज़र बचाकर मेरे हाथों को चूम लेना, बड़े अच्छे लगते हैं आँखों के कनखियों से मेरे उंगलियों की धमनियों को गिन लेना, 10 रुपए के बतासे खिलाकर मेरा वक्त खरीद लेना, बड़े अच्छे लगते हैं मेरे कही बातों को सुनकर भी सुन न पाना, क्यों कब बोलोगी मुझे प्यार करती हो, क्यों कब बोलोगे मुझे प्यार करती हो, हार कर आखिर में झिड़क देना, बरसों महीनों सदियों तक यही एक लाइन है जो मुझे बड़े 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 अच्छे लगते हैं. शुक्रिया.
बहुत बढ़िया कस्तूरिका. You are gathering a big fan following for your singing and your naughty
See, these are the
poems.
emotions I have seen in this young people who are lounging here and there in PILF. These are their emotions. These are no longer mine. And I am sure that they also have similar lines in them which will come out one day. And we will be sitting in the audience and listening to all of them.
Yes,
I'm
most
hoping
definitely.
for that day.
Most definitely we will be. And you coming to you, what I find in the way you build a narrative in a poem is that while moving through the scene, you drop something like a bomb, which is some inner wisdom. And you give the reader a clean, bold moment for that time to just think and go within. It is dramatic, I guess, but I want you to throw some light on this, the seeking or searching that we see. How is it happening? What is it? Not just related to poetry, but generally. I mean to say that when you're writing about something that any of your poems, if you take like even, yes.
If I understand your question, and you were talking about a poem called An Order for a New Head, because there's a poem called An Order for a New Head, and I live in Mumbai, which is really makes you want a new head. You know, it's so It shakes you up and rattles you and does all kinds of things. So I guess in this poem, insights are there in every poem, I think. And but the build up, and as you say, you drop a bomb somewhere, which you told me, a surprise, which is part of the poem, I guess. Now, for those who have the book, 27, I'd like to tell people the page number because they are sort of concrete poems. They may be shifting on the page, they may be appearing in different ways. Okay, so I guess in this poem, when I saying order for a new head, I'm talking to God, I think. Who else will give me a new head? No surgeon, no AI, nothing can give me a new head. Unless you all have some suggestions after the poem, let me know. But actually, when the poem comes, you yourself don't know where it's going. So it's a sort of a bomb anyway.
Yes.
To the reader, to the writer, to you, as you said. So let's just presume I'm talking to God here. An order for a new head. Small, please. Small, please. Grey and white cells. Pink too, with bits and bytes. Make the numbers even. Enough odd ones. Mold the skull with RDX plastic, the stick-fast variety. Set the teeth firmly. Rattling disturbs infants. Keep the tonsils. I like to trap irritants for happy days. 1 year is plenty. Bomb blasts are deafening in stereo. Make the nostrils narrow like a bone marrow. Air enough to live. Now the main request. Now the main request. Give me a third eye, like the one on the truck. A bright red light between two headlights, peering through the throat of a village road. That's all. That's all. Brandy eye and the third eye. In the moonlight, coconut trees, omnipresent gods. Two gods too many. Papaya's pulpy breasts, squeeze them dry. Falling twigs, a shower of snakes. Swallowing them, I emerge Medusa. Shedding my skin, I recoil in the armchair, lost to the world. Get the picture? I'm Lao Tzu, smiling at Mona Lisa. I don't know if you all understood all the references, but it's okay.
It's a lovely, lovely bomb poem, I might say. Kiran, we see a lot of suffering and references to your growing up years and a lot of confessions in your book called Autobiographia, which is an amazing collection of Spanish works which are translated in English, in which each year of his life has been written as a poem. So how have you translated all that suffering into one verse? And what was easy about it and what was difficult?
So again, let me contextualize. Autobiografia was written in Spanish, and it was written because despite being a global citizen and living so much of my adult life as a traveler, I did grow up in a very particular life as a son of immigrants to Kannadigas who chose to live in the US South in the 90s, early 2000s. And it was just not a particularly easy life. I was LGBT, I happened to be a gay person, and I was coming to terms with that in a time when it was extremely hostile to be both a sexual minority and a person of color in the US South, in Georgia, in the 90s, early 2000s. And so I felt almost from birth that I knew I was different, for all the reasons, that from the get-go, everyone saw me always as different, and to connect with others was a little difficult. To give that one poem is very difficult. That's why I wrote 29 of them. Oh, you're just asking as a question, yeah.
How did you get each year into one poem?
That's a little easier. Yeah, that's easier to answer. Yeah, basically I decided to So basically, again, going back to the other thought, the therapist had wanted me to, because we were doing therapy, and she said, yes, you lived 1 year in Istanbul, you lived 1 year in Tokyo, but despite that, even before you turned 18 and you left the home, you were actually very interesting for all the things you suffered as well. So why don't you try to write this, And it would have been difficult to write in English because English is too close to me. And Spanish I know well, so I was like, okay, I know it well enough that I can write something in it that is personal, but it's not going to hurt me, like if I write it in English. So, and I decided I didn't want to write a traditional autobiography like a memoir. I'm an experimental writer by nature. I like to experiment with different projects. So I decided I'm going to do a poem for each year, and some poems describe birth, acquiring language, acquiring concepts of the them versus the I, understanding gender, understanding differences in gender, understanding how to form language, like all these things that we do year 1, year 5, year 7, year 8, and then other things like learning you're gay or learning your sexuality, realizing you don't really fit in, realizing, well, I don't have to fit in. Why do I have to fit in? I can go somewhere else and, fit in by not fitting in at all. So, and then traveling and writing poems about that. So.
How did you write 0 year and 1 year and 2 year?
Imagination, understanding the conception. Let me now contextualize it. So I'll do 1990, for example, which is literally year 0.
Year 0. Year
Yes.
0 poem.
Solitude, darkness, sudden light, Amma's groan, cold and engulfing hands. Afterwards, decontextualization, disorientation, life. Why was I given life? I could only cough out words, but in my eyes brimmed that question. So birth.
Lovely.
Thank you. So that's birth.
Kasturika, one question for you, which is you started writing in English first.
Yes.
After the question, because we'll have the audience question.
Okay. You started writing in English first, then
Yes.
you moved on to Hindi and Urdu.
Yes.
Was that a thought of progression or it is happening organically?
English being the most largest spoken language, and I had a manuscript ready of my English poetry for as long as 10 years, but I could not get it published. But one fine day I decided I will send one of the poems to Jaipur Literature Festival's email box, and let me see if I can, take a second chance in my life. And it struck them, and they accepted it, and then they featured it on their London page, and it was from my book Metamorphosis. This is the book. This is my first book, and the poem was Death. And thereafter, I thought, let me first publish English books, and then go from a major language to a minor language. After you get a maximum readability among your audience. And since all the languages have their own, definitive idioms and definitive locales about which they write. If I write in Oriya, my context automatically belongs to Odisha, tends to become Oriya. And when I am writing in English, they are more global in language, more urban speaking population bill. But still, I have also experimented in this book, writing erotica, which women writers these days are not writing. Due to my experience as a librarian, I saw that women writers are refusing to write poems on taboo topics. So I also experimented with erotica in this book, and it worked. So that is how I am progressing. I
would like to read the poem which you read about the young girl you read recently at PWG session.
Okay.
On Thursday, I think. You'd written for your daughter or something?
There's a Hindi poem.
Yes, that's a Hindi poem, and it's so, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, whatever. It's got all that.
Referring to that one.
Yes, it's got all that content in it. Yeah, and I'll just give you the basic idea that there were a lot of young people sitting in the crowd when she started reading. They went crazy for this poem. I was there then.
See, this is basically written to become a popular poet. I am not denying that. That I am not looking for. I am not being modest that I don't want to be popular, and I am definitely, keeping it as a target. And it is essential that when you are honing your art, you should also become popular. And if you are not famous, people don't read you. And poetry as a genre in India is least read. So I just want to take poetry to that height of as people are reading fiction or non-fiction. So that is also one of my goals, proper goals, which I am able to achieve. So this poem is again for my young crowd. And गुनगुनी दिसंबर की गुलाबी गालों पर, गुनगुनी दिसंबर की गुलाबी गालों पर मखमली लड़की अंगड़ाई लेती हुई, कागज़ के पुर्ज़ों पर लिखकर मेरा नाम आधे लिखे हर्फ मिटा रही थी। एमजी बेला के रैप लूप में चलाकर, एमजी बेला के रैप लूप में चलाकर नाइट स्टे आउट की इंस्टा स्टेटस पर इतरा रही थी। कॉफ़ी के मग में उफनता क्रीम की तरह मैं उसके सामने बैठा था। कॉफ़ी के मग में उफनता क्रीम की तरह मैं उसके सामने बैठा था, पर पता नहीं अपनी भूरी आँखों के सामने वो कौन सी रील चला रही थी। मदहोश करने वाली उसकी नज़र हमारे रिश्ते की मंजिल का कोई अता पता नहीं दे रहे थे। कमरे की चार दीवारी के अंदर, पीजी के कमरे की चार दीवारी के अंदर, पीजी के कमरे की चार दीवारी के अंदर मुझे वो जन्नत की फ़िज़ा दिखा रही थी। ब्रो, हे ब्रो, डियर स्वीट हार्ट से भरी किस्सों को सुनने सुनाने के चक्कर में मेरे कंधे पर रख कर अपना दिल, अपना सर नाम किसी और का लिए जा रही थी। मेरे दोस्तों को ये खबर है, मेरे दोस्तों को ये खबर है कि हफ्ते भर से मैं उसका BFF हूँ। मेरे दोस्तों को ये खबर है कि हफ्ते भर से मैं उसका BFF हूँ, पर न जाने क्यों मेरे साथ एक सेल्फी डालकर पढ़ाई के बहाने मुझे टाल रही है। अब कॉलेज की कैंटीन में मुझे पहचानने से भी इनकार कर रही है। अब कॉलेज की कैंटीन में मुझे पहचानने से भी इनकार कर रही है। डफर, बुकवर्म, यूजलेस। माँ बोलती रही मुझे ये सब घर पर। सेम लाइन ये लड़की कैंटीन में मेरे लिए दोहरा रही है। मैंने तो दिल दिया था उसको, मैंने तो दिल दिया था उसको, ऐसा उसी से सुना था। मैंने तो दिल दिया था उसको, ऐसा उसी से सुना था। गलती से मिस्टेक किया था शायद मैंने, गलती से मिस्टेक किया था शायद मैंने। उसकी सारी हरकत यही समझा रही है। थैंक यू।
Okay, you want to open the house for questions?
My question is to Kasturika ma'am. How are you, ma'am?
I'm fine, thank you.
I'm a big fan. As you
Thank
mentioned,
you.
Gen Z, being a Gen Z, I'm a big fan now.
Thank
the way
you.
you recited your poem and everything. So, technically, what do you think about the Gen Z love? Like, how is the love? Is it just physical or emotional, or where it's going to be? And how are Gen Z poets? Yeah.
So tell you frankly, it is only lasting for half an hour. And if the lines on the Insta chat are the smaller the lines, the bigger the chances of a relationship. If they are longer, it doesn't happen. And my reading is that, meeting someone is another thing, but to live a life with somebody is another aspect. So Gen Zs are also getting married. I mean, I didn't get married for the same reason as you. That, after half an hour, I lost all interest.
You are going to be the next love guru.
But I am not professing that you don't get married. And life has different trajectories for everyone, and to each his or her own. I definitely want all of you to read good literature, good poetry, our classical literature. I have also composed a lot of classical literature just to popularize them among the Gen Z. And these are like, time pass. Because sometimes in the crowd people don't know the language you are reciting in, so it's very difficult for them to appreciate it. But I definitely would like all of you to read more and more of Indian writing, like Anju ma'am, senior writers are there. We are always, influenced by Western writings, but in our Indic literature tradition, we have so much to read. Even today also, I'm like a student of literature. I am a science background student, but I read every day. Unless you read, there is no chance of you forget about writing, convincingly leading a fruitful life. Thank you. Thank you for asking the question.